Are you gonna try to videotape it? Okay.
We're rolling. All right. Who's going first? Magdalena's going first?
Well, mine is gonna be.
Okay. All right. Good morning, everyone. My name is Lynn Davis, and I am director of the Jewish Community Relations Council for Tucson and Southern Arizona. We are a program of Tucson Jewish Museum and Holocaust Center, all fabulous organizations that I would love to tell you more about, maybe over lunch. And I'm thrilled to be here, and I'm thrilled to partner with our friends at the YWCA and to invite you all here and our friends at League of Women Voters for Greater Tucson to talk about some really important stuff this morning. So we're here to talk about the past, present, and future of abortion rights in our state. And we have just such a remarkable brain trust up here on this stage together, up here on this stage. I'm really thrilled to welcome everyone. Sivia Tamarkin is president of NCJW Arizona. I'm thrilled to be on their board, and I'm the only Southern Arizona board member, so my goal in joining the organization was to help build membership here in Southern Arizona, and to really, it's one of the strategies to get folks down here in our beautiful blue bubble more engaged in state politics. So please, all these folks will be around after the panel, and happy to answer questions and tell you more about the work that they're doing. I'm going to let Sivia introduce our panelists in just a moment, but I'm first going to welcome Magdalena Verdugo, who is CEO and Executive Director of the most remarkable YWCA for Tucson, for Southern Arizona. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much for having us.
I won't take too much time because I know I'm standing between what we hope to engage with today and do a lot of learning, listening, learning. So Magdalena Verdugo, CEO of the YWCA, I just want to welcome you to our space here today, and we're super excited to be sharing it with you all. And so we're a pivotal state when it comes to abortion access. And so I think that we have a lot of work between now and election to increase the awareness of the issue, and voting becomes critical, right? And mobilizing, especially our women. And so we will be launching our Why Women Vote campaign here this summer. And really it's about getting our women to understand the issue and be able to exercise their right to vote. So thank you, it's great to collaborate with these phenomenal organizations that reside here in our community, and really appreciate the support, and thank you for being here today. And I'm going to turn it over to Victor, who's going to lead us in the land acknowledgement.
Thank you, Magdalena. Hi, my name is Victor Boleg, and I serve here as the program manager for the Center for Gender and Racial Equity. And if you saw the beautiful mural outside here, we're going to have an unveiling in May, and we'd love to have as many folks from the public to come here to acknowledge the Laura Banks Reed Center for Gender and Racial Equity. So we're going to go ahead and formally begin with our land acknowledgement. We would like to acknowledge the land on which we sit. We recognize and acknowledge the people, culture, and history that make up this community. Our native sisters and brothers from the Paskayaki tribe and the Tohono. We sit on the original homelands of indigenous peoples who have guarded this land for centuries. We are thankful to our relatives, the traditional cultural bearers and caretakers of these lands. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Victor. Thank you, Magdalena. Thank you for hosting us. It's about a year and a half, but maybe it was still during COVID that we first did a Zoom with Lynn and talked about partnering with the Y. So thank you very much. Appreciate it. And welcome to everybody. And to our partners in the League of Women Voters. I'm president of NCJW, the Arizona section. NCJW is a 130-year-old social justice organization. Founded in Chicago initially began to work with refugee relocation and began to champion women's rights, women's advocacy, children's advocacy. In fact, we're very excited to always point out that NCJW was the precursor of Planned Parenthood. That NCJW established the first 10 birth control clinics in the country. And Margaret Sanger was the chairperson. So it has come full circle starting around 2017 that NCJW's primary focus became social justice within the framework of reproductive health advocacy. Because under that umbrella, we advocate for so many causes. Everything is part of reproductive justice. Certainly the right to determine whether or not to parent, but the right to determine, well, the right, if you choose to parent, to raise your child in a safe, viable, productive, sustainable environment. So that includes gender equity, that includes LGBTQ plus rights, public education, environmental justice, economic justice. It's every issue. So we're so proud to be able to do all of that within the framework of reproductive justice. We, of course, are here today to talk about the need to pass this constitutional amendment in Arizona and to give you some context about why it's so necessary. But I do want to signal, and we're all very much aware, when this gets on the ballot, when this passes, it does not solve the problem. Because reproductive autonomy is about far more than abortion.
That's right.
Just as fetal personhood is about far more than the, quote, soul of a gestational embryo. This is an issue that's about sexism, racism, and classism, and the intersectionality of that. And it's about more than the modern day Handmaid's Tale of forcing women to become breeders. It's about subjugation of ethnic groups, of economic groups, and it's about feeding, quite frankly, a school to prison pipeline. So when we look at this, let's look at it in the entirety of what this issue is. Unfortunately, we are living in the most dangerous of times because only 9 states have unrestricted, well, 8 states and the District of Columbia have unrestricted access to terminate a pregnancy. 14 states have limitations. And 28 states have restrictions that are so harsh that it imposes a real burden. This is not new. This is something that has been in the making since 1973. And unfortunately, those of us who support bodily autonomy became complacent. We figured we won at the Supreme Court, and I'm old enough to say I was one of them. We won at the Supreme Court, the highest court in the land. We had attained a right that will not be taken away any more than we thought voting rights would be taken away. And because we became complacent, we were caught off guard, while the other side mobilized so strategically, and they still are doing it today. But they began to train their minions from the ground up with their anti-abortion camps, literally summer camps for kids, training people to run for local office, school boards, and we are all seeing that backlash now, state office, national office until, of course, we had the big change with the Tea Party taking over. And then everything snowballed. So they created the Federalist Society. They put the judges in place. They never lost sight of the prize. And unfortunately, we did. Here in Arizona, we became a model state for experimenting with some of these bans. We have someone in the state, Kathy Herod. We have the Center for Arizona Policy, which literally would take the templates from Americans United for Life and the National Right to Life organizations, the template bills, and pass them to legislators in Arizona. So we became, and I'm at this point opening it up because I have all my expert friends here, we became one of the first states to have a mandatory waiting period, mandatory sonogram. So we'll put it in that historical context, we'll bring it to where we're now, and we will tell you about what we're fighting as we move forward. So I'm delighted to sit here with my nearest and dearest here, Jody Liggett, an attorney who was executive director of public policy for Planned Parenthood and chief of staff for Greg Stanton when he was mayor. And she also served as deputy chief of staff, I think, for Kate Gallego. She is a lobbyist. She is NCJW's lobbyist and public policy advisor. And she is the founder of a think tank for women's issues. ACWA is the acronym, Arizona Center for Advancement of Women, right? Dr. Gabrielle Goodrick is a noted provider, a healthcare specialist who trained under the legendary Dr. George Tiller. Wow. She is, everyone thinks Planned Parenthood is the excess. In fact, Gabi provides 1/3 more of the terminations in this state than Planned Parenthood. And she not only provides early terminations, but she has always been an expert on how to manage late-term pregnancies that are problematic. So she's been a pioneer here and will give you the perspective from someone who is fighting every day, including talk about a unique lawsuit that she is facing. And of course, Julie Gunnigal, who most of you undoubtedly know, even though you are in Pima County. She was our Democratic candidate for Maricopa County prosecutor and is well known for her fierce advocacy, legal advocacy for women's rights, for voting rights for those who were charged with, drug possession charges. And we are delighted to have her on our NCJW board as well. So why don't we start with Jody as the political and policy expert here. Give us some context about how did Arizona become so fierce in their opposition to abortion? I mean, we do know that under Goldwater, Planned Parenthood was set up here. So how did we take this about face?
Thank you, Sylvia, and thank you for the promotion. I should have been Greg Stanton's chief of staff. I was just a senior policy advisor.
Okay.
Thank you so much all for being here too. And I think it's interesting, of course we want to understand Arizona because we live here. A lot of us were born here. I've spent my whole life here, my whole adult life here. So but I think it's also important. Arizona is a good place to understand because it mirrors so much of the nation. And then I don't want to get too personal, but I also think like my little story is also reflective of, I think, a lot of folks. Before I worked for Greg Stanton and Kate Gallego, I worked at the Arizona legislature as a staffer for the majority, which was Republican then, and worked for Jane Hull, who was a Republican governor. That's back in the days when you could be a moderate pro-choice Republican, and there were a lot of them, especially in a place like Arizona, which is kind of libertarian, but the independent thing hadn't caught on and taken off. So, you know, the Republican Party used to be a pretty comfortable home for moderate folks who just didn't want government messing around a lot, you know, either in their business or their private lives. So different now, right? And I think the evolution of abortion rights in Arizona also mirrors, especially, you know, there has been a plan, right? Like absolutely, it was the fondest desire and the plan of extremists to get to this point all along. Like they knew what they were doing, but then there's, you know, all these concentric rings of people of varying intensity, let's just say, with their feelings on abortion, who kind of, in some cases, unwittingly were part of that movement, but they weren't trying to be puppet masters, right? Maybe they wanted to pursue their career, you know, in politics, or just be active in their communities, but they weren't trying to change the very face of our country and our culture. So in Arizona, Sylvia's right. It's not a well-known fact anymore, but Peggy and Barry Goldwater helped found the Planned Parenthood in Phoenix, and they were on the board for many, many years. And it was kind of that enlightened, self-interested, I wouldn't say Barry Goldwater was a moderate, but socially, right? It's like, well, if you don't want to have poor people, you should help poor people, you know, have access to contraception. That makes sense. Now that's loaded with a lot, and I'm just gonna, right, acknowledge that and leave that alone, but that's important. And I think that was a common sense of things for many years. So you had Roe. I think people took for granted that we would always have a national Supreme Court that was the backstop for rights, whether it was access to education or voting or health care. Now we know that, you know, even that sacred institution has been completely politicized, but that was not the fact back in the day. So you had people, you know, mostly in the center left kind of, or excuse me, center right, running things in Arizona. And slowly over decades, Republicans, rank and file Republicans realized, you know, starting with Ronald Reagan and his realization that if we co-opt evangelical Christians, we can win the presidency, and making abortion, anti-abortion rights, a plank in the party's platform, right? To me, that was when things changed. Some of that was a reaction, but also it was part of a larger plan. And then it starts, you can see it progress from there, where it becomes a litmus test for candidates, right? That slow erosion, and no, you are no longer welcome in the Republican Party if you're pro-choice. You just have no place here. And we saw in Arizona and other states, I think Roe was a shock to the system, and then you have the Republican reaction and aligning themselves with evangelical Christians, and then very active in states saying, well, you know, if we can't ban it, we're gonna regulate it to death. And that is part of what Sylvia was talking about, and that's what we experienced in Arizona for decades. You've heard of TRAP laws, right? Targeted regulation of abortion providers. It resonates with inexperienced policymakers and especially a lot of members of the public, because abortion has this, still to this day, we haven't normalized it yet, it has this ick factor or scary factor. People irrationally believe that it is a dangerous procedure, and I think that's a hangover from when it was illegal, and it in fact could be a very dangerous procedure. So the right was able to sell health and safety regulations as something sensible, right? When really it was just placing barrier after barrier after barrier. And then you see also the threads of misogyny in here, like especially things like a 24-hour waiting period. Like, ladies, you know how you change your minds, you better be really sure. Like, are you kidding me? Right? That is not, I don't think there has been a waiting period requirement for any other kind of medical procedure, right? And particularly for a procedure like abortion, which is one of the safest and simplest procedures out there, right, in the first trimester. So I'm gonna stay out of your lane, doctor. But these are not health and safety requirements, but they were sold as that. And you had moderate Republicans who want to go along to get along and, you know, keep themselves in the majority. I'm so glad Sylvia mentioned the Tea Party, because that should have been our wake-up call. But I think we all mistakenly thought, that's, you know, just cranky folks who want to roll back government regulations and whatnot and cut taxes to the bone. But they're not going to go after our fundamental rights as women. Yes, they are. If it's expedient, they will. And I think political experts on the other side knew in advance, and also, you know, they were reinforced decade after decade. And Arizona wasn't alone. This is going on in many other states. So we have a 24-hour waiting period, a physician-only requirement, a hospital admitting privileges requirement, which isn't even a thing anymore, right? So many surgery center-like requirements for facilities, unannounced inspections, right? Making it not only hard for a pregnant person to access the procedure, but then also for a medical professional and the facility to deliver that health care. Very insidious. And all this got reinforced among the states, and here in Arizona, people are realizing, oh, we were right. There are single issue voters out there. There are people who will join and stay in our party and vote our way on this one single thing. So if that's where you have the Bush administration, you know, interrogating every single potential political appointee, no matter where they're going to work, whether it's, you know, regulating airlines or somewhere in commerce, or, you know, gas pipelines, about their views on abortion, because every single one of them has to be pro-life, because that's the test, right? And it's this feedback loop where now you've got an entire party who is in this almost like spiritual war against abortion, and it's taken on these really scary proportions, and they're reinforced for it because it does help win elections for them. It absolutely is. I think the only silver lining here is they absolutely have gone too far. I think it was too far a long time ago, but I think even for everyday people, fetal personhood is what is going to wake folks up and help them realize this is insane, and this is not about protecting women. This is not about loving babies. This is not about people's health care. It is, we've all been duped. It's a tool. So we are in a situation here in Arizona, the only way we're going to take back and be able to deliver health care to millions of women and pregnant people is a constitutional amendment. And oh my God, what a heavy, can you believe we have to do this? I'm reminded of those signs, you know, in the Women's March where older folks were saying, I can't believe I have to protest this shit all over again. Right? I can't believe that we have to raise and spend $50 million and collect 800,000 probably raw signatures so that we have around 400,000 good signatures. This is not automatic, by the way. I don't want anyone in this room to be sanguine about that effort. We're going to get it done, but every single one of us has to help get it done because it is not going to just happen. So we have an incredibly complex and hard to surmount web now of regulations. And Republicans have used this issue to gain and keep a majority in the Arizona state legislature. That's the most important thing. And there's gerrymandering, there's all these threads that are part of it. But abortion has been the linchpin issue that has kind of held the whole thing together. And I just hope all of us are sick and tired of it, because really, for most of the state of Arizona, for most of our history, even during the Roe v. Wade years, most women, most pregnant people did not have access to abortion. Our far-flung geography, the incredibly insulting and insistent nature of regulation has just made it out of reach even when it was legal on the books. And by the way, when we say fetal personhood, it's really zygote personhood that folks are talking about. They mean sperm hits egg right at that moment. That is a person. So before a pregnancy is even established, and when they say they're not coming for birth control,
they are
liars. I mean, they're being very lawyer-like about, if I can just insult my own profession for a minute, they're being very specific and lawyerly with that. Okay, they're not going to attack contraception, but they're going to systematically relabel forms of contraception as abortifacients, abortifacient drugs and abortifacient methods, because, right, in theory, it prevents implantation. Now I'm getting in your lane again. So really, this has been a deeply cynical effort by a small minority of folks. And then the only way they were able to be successful in that effort is that lots of plain old, average, everyday, probably decent people like our friends, neighbors, and family members were kind of duped and swept into that movement. That's why I think it's also really important for us. I know we're really all hardcore on this and have been for most of our lives, but right, I was a pro-choice Republican, but I was a Republican. And I was welcomed into the Democratic Party and into our cause at Planned Parenthood because, old school Arizonans kind of got it. We can't have retroactive purity tests. That'll be my final plea to the audience before I pass it off. I know that can be uncomfortable for us, but we're in the minority. If we want to take over statewide offices and have a legislative majority and start rebuilding our judiciary, we have to welcome in people who realize it's gone too far and bring them along, according to our view of the world, and help them understand that actually it's been their view of the world all along. They just didn't realize that they were being deceived. So that's
Thank you. I want to hold the fetal personhood for a moment because that is going to be a significant part of the program, because that's where this state is headed. I do want to get a plug in there, and that is we would be facing a situation with no abortions provided in Arizona right now, even though there is a 15-week ban. There would be no abortions had NCJW and our co-plaintiffs not won an injunction against the fetal personhood law on the books here. Because when Roe is overturned, even though there was debate about the 15-week ban, the territorial ban, providers were concerned about the criminalization inherent in the personhood law. So we won that injunction, and we're in federal appellate court now, hoping to keep that. But I would like to get the perspective from Dr. Goodrick, and then we'll get to where we're at now with Julie. But I'd like to get the perspective because as a provider, you have always said that before Roe, before Dobbs' decision that ended Roe, before the incremental nibbling away at access, for the past 20 years or so, it has been so problematic in Arizona. So give us the perspective from someone who every day is on the front lines here.
Well, thank you, Sylvia, and thanks everyone for being here. I've been a physician here in Arizona for almost 31 years. Wow. And I've been providing since 1995, first at Planned Parenthood and then in my own practice in 1999. So I feel like I've seen it. I kind of joke, I haven't moved, but in terms of abortion provision in our state, moved from California to Alabama without moving. For the first 15 years, practicing until Janet Napolitano left and we got Jan Brewer in 2009. Before that, we didn't have any restrictions, really. I mean, it was monitored by the medical board or skills that you were trained in, just like any other medical procedure. I worked at the hospitals. I did abortions at hospitals. But starting in 2009, with the Republicans in charge and the governor and the legislature, it was how many bills can we pass? How fast can we pass them to restrict abortion? And basically, you know, with my experience, it was about every year or so, we had new regulations. We had to go through and change all our paperwork. We had to add paperwork. We had to get notaries. We had in-person 24-hour wait, which is very, very difficult for patients because we're such a rural state that for patients to travel 2 times to a clinic, mostly in the Phoenix area and a few in Tucson, but traveling even in Phoenix is hard. I mean, it could be an hour and a half to get to a clinic. So, you know, seeing the increase in regulations, basically hospitals, even secular hospitals, becoming more and more conservative, limiting privileges, especially I'm a family physician, so it's hard to get privileges now because family physicians don't go to hospitals. So just watching that over the years, and then of course with Dobbs and without the injunction for the personhood, we faced in June of 2022 closing down. We didn't know. In the morning of that day that Dobbs was decided, the governor said it was fine at 8 o'clock in the morning, but by noon, you know, the Republicans in the Senate issued a statement saying that abortion was illegal in the state. It was very disruptive. Obviously, patients were very upset. We had to cancel appointments. And the next day, the injunction was filed, right, or to get an injunction against the personhood. And we waited. We didn't know how long that would take. It was, again, what do we tell patients? What do I tell my staff? How do we function as a medical provider providing an essential medical service to patients? I mean, it was a very traumatic time for staff, patients, everyone. And luckily that lasted 2 weeks, but not for most organizations. Most organizations stayed closed because of the ambiguity in our laws. It was very confusing. But it was a rough year. It disrupted clinics closed. People had to travel. So we've seen a shift basically in the way, since Dobbs, with all the changes, I mean, we've seen a shift in terms of self-managed abortions, telemedicine abortions. Those things are all banned in Arizona. We cannot do telemedicine. Doctors have to do all the provision. No nurse practitioners or PAs can be involved at any level of their care. And so in the fall, when we had some clarification, clinics were able to reopen mostly in October, November of 2022. but it took months and months for patients to even feel comfortable. Is it legal? Is it not? Where do I go? Things were still, it was a very rough time, and I think that in Arizona it was particularly rough. I mean, because of access in our state, it's just very, and now it's almost probably 90% limited to the Phoenix area. There is no provision with all these restrictions. Like I said, back in the early 2000s, there was abortion provision in Yuma, Prescott, Flagstaff, Tucson, and all around Phoenix. I think there were many places, more clinics in Phoenix. So these things affect clinics and patients long-term because of the restrictions. And then now, I mean, the idea of opening up a new clinic, I mean, that would be almost so overwhelming. I kind of had it from, like I said, every year or two we had to make changes, so it was very gradual. And now it's like, you know, there's 5 pages of restrictions and rules that we have to follow. There's also a lot of paperwork. And I think the governor is trying to get that lifted, but in terms of state reporting, I have employees working probably 3/4 of a job, just gathering these statistics that are required by the state and submitting them online. We have deadlines to submit those things. It is a paperwork nightmare. People don't talk about it, but the governor did talk about it and trying to get it reversed, so that would be amazing. But basically, I mean, at this point, we do have a 15-week ban. That affects patients. That is a stepping stone for total ban. And gestational limits are nothing but, I think, again, ways to control people that can get pregnant in terms of their decisions that should be between a doctor and a patient and a family. These are personal decisions. This is about reproductive freedom. Patients that have late abortions are just what you think. They live rurally, they're young, they're poor, they're in difficult medical situations sometimes. They are people that, you know, we should be the most compassionate with. We shouldn't ban them from having care. And also, of course, we have other types of bans. But I think, you know, in terms of the referendum or the ballot initiative, there's nothing more important, nothing. I mean, except for winning the legislature, but getting that ballot initiative and getting it in our Arizona Constitution that gives people that can get pregnant reproductive freedom. It gives, I mean, that's what Arizona is all about. When I moved here in the 90s, that's why I moved here. I didn't know it was gonna turn into, you know, a crazy state. I mean, honestly, I really, you know, didn't, it's really interesting to watch it because before we had our restrictions, I had friends in Louisiana, in these states, and I just saw them suffer and never imagined that I would be facing those types of bans. I mean, I really never imagined it, and I think you're pointing out that shift in politics here is very interesting, and I think that as long as we're aware of that, you know, the ballot initiative is honestly, like I said, the most important thing for people in Arizona to have reproductive freedom, because it will be in our Constitution, and that's what we need.
Thank you. And I would like to point out, having followed Dr. Goodwin's work for 10 years, 11 years, the harassment that she and other providers have gone through, but I would take the liberty of saying you more frequently because she's an independent provider. She's the largest independent provider. She doesn't have a national organization behind her like Planned Parenthood chapters. So she has had inspectors from the state show up. She's had posturing actors that were contracted to pose as potential clients to entrap her and her staff. And on top of all of that, and this is the segue to the next phase, she is now facing an extraordinary lawsuit, I believe the first in the country, by one of them, by the estate of an 8-week gestational embryo.
What?
The father, it was a marital situation where the woman was getting divorced and she was pregnant, she voluntarily had an abortion, and 2 years later, I believe it was, a year and a half, the father decided to sue, and what's very interesting, he's not only suing Gabi for, quote, the loss of love and parental affection, etc., but he's suing for projected lost income that this 8-week gestational embryo may have provided. And, you know, so she's really on the front lines. And this, you'll get a trial date, you would anticipate a trial date for this. It has not been dismissed by the judge in Globe.
This was a case filed in federal court initially, and now it is in Globe.
Oh no.
Globe, Arizona.
Globe.
The man involved initially filed as an executor of the embryo's estate, and he got it. The woman who was my patient fought it, but could not fight it. So yes, he became the executor, and then he filed the lawsuit. And so it has been moving at a snail's pace through that situation, you know. And so, but we finally think that that judge, I mean, this is going to trial. Obviously, we've tried everything to get it dismissed, and that just doesn't work because their agenda is, this will, you know, this gives personhood, obviously, to an embryo. This woman came in, she has no problem with the care she received, she got what she wanted. This man is abusive in every way. It's a very, so it'll be very interesting to go to trial, and my thought is bring it on. I mean, they wanted to settle, I would not settle. This is absolutely ridiculous. So we're gonna see what happens, but I'm kinda like, bring it on. It's been 4 years. This patient was seen in 2018.
Right.
So this has been going on for years.
And I had to make the turn then, because this is, as I said earlier, fetal personhood is accounting for so many of the obstacles. And it is the vehicle for criminalization of pregnancy. Since, in the last 10 years, I believe it is, there have been, I actually have the date here, and I can't find it, but since there have been 1,400 cases across the country of pregnant people who's, since 06, I'm sorry, 06 to 22, 1,400 cases of pregnant persons who were charged with crimes perceived to endanger the fetus. And we are headed in that direction. And that's what's so incredible, because even when we get the amendment legalizing abortion, it does not preclude criminalizing pregnancy. So I would like to turn to our esteemed attorney here, and who I neglected to mention, you know, was a Cook County, Illinois prosecutor, so she's been with some of the down and dirty cases in the system. And she's also working, as I did mention, with expungement of drug offenses so that people can register to vote. There is an intersection here because the criminalization of substance abuse during pregnancy is what has opened the door here for all of these abuses. And it is something that Arizona keeps trying to install here. Julie?
Thank you so much. Of everything you hear today, I might be the biggest downer of some of the news that I have to share. Because my practice is, as Sylvia says, everything that encircles reproductive justice. It's about being able to support families and making sure that families are able to raise their children in sustainable environments, which is not necessarily happening here in Arizona. One thing you might want to know is, as a result of fetal personhood out of right here in Pima County, we had a case in 1993. It was a mama who was consuming substances during pregnancy, and she was charged with basically an attempted murder type offense as the result of endangering her fetus, without any sort of scientific rationale, because we know more about how substances affect a pregnant body now than we ever have before. But thankfully, a judge came in and said, no, the criminal law does not, in Arizona in 1993, does not allow for us to think about a fetus as a person. So if NCJW's injunction doesn't happen, we very likely will face this idea that fetal endangerment and attempted murder could come back right here in Arizona. We know what that looks like nationwide because, as Cynthia rightly points to, we've seen 1,400 other instances of it. We've seen cases like out of Iowa, there was a woman named Christine Taylor. She was heavily pregnant with her third child. She fell down the stairs. She went right to the emergency room to get checked out. And during triage, she admitted to one of the nurses that she was not excited about this pregnancy because of her current marital situation. She was held in jail for 2.5 days while the police investigated whether or not she fell down the stairs or whether or not she decided to throw herself down the stairs. It's cases like the Patel case out of Indiana, where a person was alleged to have taken DIY abortion drugs. Of course, those drugs can't be tested in anyone's system. Nevertheless, that prosecution persisted for years, almost a decade, trying to imprison this poor woman who had lost a pregnancy. And there is a very real reality that could happen in Arizona, and I would argue that part of that's happening right now. So part of my work that centers on obstetric violence and reproductive freedom and police violence, I mean, we've seen birth centers in the East Valley raided on behalf of fetuses and searched. We've seen cases where mamas have consumed substances that were medicinal, where they have been penalized for up to 25 years. And in fact, NCJW was a key partner in winning a lawsuit that received national attention, where a mother who had hyperemesis gravidarum, that's a very severe form of nausea during pregnancy, basically vomit for 9 months. You wouldn't wish it on your worst enemy, right? Not even Kathy Herod. And that's a Center for Arizona policy joke. The only thing that would touch it, because no pharmaceuticals would help her, and 1 out of 3 of these pregnancies end in miscarriage because you end up so malnourished and so dehydrated. And she had been a medical marijuana patient, and her doctor, after she tried everything, said, maybe you need to go back to that. Maybe that will help her. And that was the thing that helped her have a healthy baby boy. Nevertheless, when that healthy baby boy was born, even though a doctor had said that she could do this, they placed her on the Central Neglect Registry, making her unemployable for 25 years, and opened an investigation that would have taken away her child. We fought that all the way up to the Court of Appeals. We won, which is unusual in the state of Arizona, given that we have such a packed and very conservative judiciary. And it took 2 years later for the Department of Child Safety to say, hey, we're not going to open those sorts of investigations anymore. 2 years to even recognize a court ruling. In fact, in the interim, took a case out of Pima County with a mom who had been consuming before she even knew she was pregnant. As soon as she knew she was pregnant, she stopped. Nevertheless, that provider and hospital reported her to and opened an investigation. It's a big issue, the way this state uses soft policing, especially when it comes to pregnancy, and I'm speaking of soft policing as our Department of Child Safety, because in Maricopa County, at least, we terminate parental rights at a rate that is 17.5 times the rate of New York City. So that is not 17.5% more, 17.5 times more, and it's primarily waged against the exact communities that you can expect. Our poorest, our most marginalized, our indigenous community, and of course our Black families in Maricopa County. That's how that system works. And right now at the state, we're fighting an effort to expand that system that would allow a police officer, upon the suspicion that someone has a substance use disorder that is not responsive to treatment, to involuntarily treat that person for either 60 days or a full year. And we know how this sort of involuntary commitment law is played out across the country. We know that it's, again, going to be waged against our most marginalized communities, but again, it's going to be waged against pregnant people in particular, based on this idea that we have about the war on drugs. It's also profoundly confusing because in Arizona, if you are pregnant, you do not have the right to seek confidential treatment. So we're placing pregnant people in this untenable catch-22. If you discover that you're pregnant and you're using, and not all use we acknowledge is problematic use or even substance use disorder, but if that applied to a pregnant person, they can't go get treatment because the doctors will report them. And what was striking to me, as you probably know, our state is now #1 in the country for congenital syphilis. And in no small part, that's because of this fear, right, of being reported to soft policing systems, like pregnancy criminalization, like DCS, like having, police come in and investigate healthcare outcomes, which is happening in our state. So if you get nothing else from this amazing panel today, I want you to get two big things. First, we only have abortion care in the state of Arizona because of 2 court injunctions. One, we're waiting to hear from the Arizona Supreme Court on our 1864 abortion law, and the other, the fetal personhood lawsuit on SB 1457 that NCJW is participating in. A slight breeze, and this system that we have collapses. And that's why we are so desperate. It is so important that you sign, that you get your friends, your neighbors, your strangers to sign this, so we can get this on the darn ballot and protect it, because it's a slight breeze and this whole system collapses. The second thing is, I've seen a lot of you nodding along about some of the important work that NCJW Arizona does, so I wanted to again extend an invitation. We want you on the team. The work that this organization does is so important, whether it be suing the state about the fetal personhood law, or submitting things like amicus briefs, which we did on the 1864 law, saying that, this fetal personhood idea enshrines one very narrow view of when life begins. It's not even shared by all Christians, never mind all religious faiths. So we want you here. This is the place to be in terms of a powerhouse leader and a powerhouse organization. And thank you so much for having us.
And of course, Julie is our VP of Legal Affairs on our board and guides us. With that, why don't we, I'm not sure of timing, but take some questions? Anybody? Yes.
So, I'm a social worker, and I worked in the education system for over 25 years, and I think that there's some pieces that need to be accentuated in this movement, and one is that there are more women prisoners in Arizona today than I think in history. I don't know the number, I just know it's greatly increased. Secondly, I think we have one of the largest foster care populations in the country. I think we're 1, 2, or 3. When I moved here in 1990, and I got pregnant that year, I found out that Arizona was #2 for teen pregnancy. We had no support services whatsoever. And I started the Teen Mother Mentor program in the schools here. And today, we have a couple of programs, but the resources that are available to teens are so minimal, and most of them are Christian-based, and I just found out recently that our federal government funds them. These kinds of pieces of information, I think, need to be brought out into the public. In addition to that, the other thing that's happening is they're cutting all kinds of parent services. As they're saying they want to support fetal life and they want to support birth, they're not supporting mothers and families, and they're cutting the resources, whether it be insurance, whether it be, food, whatever it is. So I think we also need to encapsulate that information, and I wonder what's being done around that. Is that being also looked at? Because if we're going to fight the Christian right movement, which is about family, supposedly, then we need to also point out what's happening in regards to this movement in cutting resources for families.
And the hypocrisy of what
Yes,
is to be.
exactly.
I'll just jump in and say, the reproductive justice movement is really a movement of BIPOC folks, Black women and women of color, and we need to respect that, right? But I think, I would call on, I'm a white woman, I would call on my sisters to just really lean in as allies and support that, because I think there's just a gap in terms of people power and also allyship, relationships. So really though, the reproductive justice movement is the template for what you're talking about. The reproductive justice movement is the most pro-life movement out there, and I want us to take back that term, because, right, when Doug Ducey used to brag about Arizona being the most pro-life state in the country, right, we trolled him on that at women's marches. We would say like 14,000 children in foster care is not pro-life. The lowest temporary assistance for needy families grant in the country for, right, who's on welfare? Single mothers raising children, largely, right? $244 a month, you're gonna keep anybody alive on that? Of course not, that's not pro-life, right? And we can't go down, every single one of these rabbit trails, but it's ripe for development. Our foster care system needs to evolve. I think a bunch of very well-intended folks, one of our former governors being one of them, Janet Napolitano, right, had a philosophy of better safe than sorry. That is what led to this movement of removing children, not realizing that, even as my lawyer in my divorce said, even a D- dad is kind of better than no dad at all. And by that I mean, removal itself is incredibly traumatizing to children of every age, but particularly infants, which is what is so insidious about the criminalization of pregnancy and discouraging pregnant folks from getting treatment, right, so they can keep that baby with them, because that is the most important thing. But reproductive justice, a 360 view, we have to be fighting for equal pay so that folks can have a family if they want to. Right? This isn't about, kind of demonistic democratic women who hate children and don't want anybody to have a pregnancy and everybody should have an abortion, it's a rite of passage, right? Like, that's the cartoon image that our opposition paints. We know the truth. We are a movement of love and acceptance, and we just want everybody to be okay, particularly children. But that means a lot of specific things like housing and equal pay. Girls, everybody finishing high school, but especially girls finishing high school, right? And going on so that they can, raise a family or not as they choose. This is just so important, and I think we can really create a gigantic movement politically and also socially, opening people's eyes to it's a lot more complicated than a cluster of cells and is that a baby. This is about so much more than that, right? This is about supporting everyday families, however those families look.
I'd like to put a quick exclamation point on that. So thank you, first of all, so much for your service. But I do want to share with you what a story of one of the women that I'm working with who got out of Perryville, went to prison because she was addicted, kind of a very common story. The uncommon part is while she was in prison, she got clean, which is almost unheard of right now because fewer than 2% of the beds in prison are treatment beds, right? But what you might not hear is if someone's incarcerated for more than 365 days, it makes it possible to terminate their parental rights. So while she was incarcerated, she lost her children, and thankfully she got family adjacent placements for her kiddos. But when she got out, she fell in love. Decided that it was time to start a family. And one of the things that she learned when she got pregnant is that in the state of Arizona, if you've had a termination of parental rights and get pregnant anytime in the next 2 years, that baby is presumed to be neglected. And as a result, she opted to terminate rather than go through the process of having DCS interfere in her lives. So it's these regressive policies that conservatives are pushing that are actually pushing for more abortions that they claim that they don't want. There is one thing that gives me hope, and it is that within these reproductive justice circles, and in particular, at a table that a lot of us participate in, we're hearing from Director Thornell about what's going on with maternal care in the prisons. We're hearing from our new director of DCS about what he's doing to change the foster care and child safety system, which I haven't heard about abortion and child safety be talked about in the same breath for a very long time.
Exactly, as Julie said, Jody, Julie and I, along with a large group of people, sit on a strategic partnership planning group. And we look at the bills that come up, we look at the situation at DCS and Department of Corrections, we meet with them. So we are doing the umbrella of reproductive justice. And also, let's not forget public education here. What's so interesting is that we have been fighting bills for years that are backdoors to this, like the legalization of pregnant persons driving in HOV lanes. That's the back, which was introduced last year. That's the back door to acknowledging there are two people in that car, so it's personhood. And we're also, Julie is particularly working hard, but there's a bill this week. Is it not a crossover?
Yeah, it's
The
on
substance
crossover.
abuse.
Wednesday it's being heard. Yeah, Wednesday the involuntary treatment bill is being heard House side. I forget which committee it's in, but the numbers of Judiciary, oh gosh, that's gonna be so bad.
Talk more about that, Julie. This involuntary treatment thing is insidious.
Yeah, so right now, in our state, one of the things that we're kind of working through is that treatment really isn't accessible for most people. It's hard to find beds, it's hard to find evidence-based beds. The more we know about addiction treatment, the more we know that what we do right now in rehab and detox isn't working and isn't successful. Our rate of relapse is enormous. But there's a real push in the legislature right now, and you'll find it even on Matt Gress's Twitter feed. He ran into somebody who was overdosing. And as a result, he believes now more than ever that we need to basically incarcerate folks until they're clean. And there's a few points I want to make about that. First of all, it doesn't work. Every single state that's gone down involuntary treatment, they found out how much it doesn't work. In fact, it is better for your overdose rates to do nothing at all than to do involuntary treatment in your state. There's also big civil liberties concerns, but there's such a push right now at the legislature to do something, even if that something is unjust and inhumane, and just such a lack of understanding. In fact, is a real vacuum when it comes to drug policy in Arizona. I've never really seen anything like it. Maybe it's that I sit kind of on a place that's like the intersection between pregnancy criminalization and drug policy, but there's not a lot of organizations that are centering on what is evidence-based. And as a result, we're reverting to these really gross bills. The other thing that I will say about the judiciary committees in both the House and the Senate is y'all should think about canceling your streaming services and just tune into these committees. Like, no, I mean, you don't need Bravo if you have House Jude in your life. These committees are so toxic that our advisors and our lobbyists are telling us not to send ordinary civilian citizens down there because they will be harassed and berated by the people who are elected to represent them. It's incredibly problematic. It's incredibly gross. We do need all hands on deck on this issue in particular, because there are some traditional allies who don't yet get it about how problematic this is. And by traditional allies, I do mean Democrats. Like, there are Democrats who don't understand that involuntary treatment is not the path forward, and this is gonna be waged against pregnant people. So it's a lot of education that has to happen.
Yeah, it's a tough one too, because you'll have, I am sure everybody in this room is at least adjacent, right, to someone with a substance abuse problem. So we have elected officials who, that's part of their personal story, right? Maybe they lost a child, or have some other personal tragedy, and they think, oh, if only I had been able to force, my child into treatment, they would still be here. And as I'll just get real personal with you folks and share, my son has been in 13 rehabs, and he is, thank goodness, right now at 34, 6 months of sobriety. But forced treatment doesn't work. It doesn't work, and it is incredibly inappropriate for pregnant or parenting people. That is not the environment. So it is just not the answer, but I think people in their grief and shame and guilt are supporting things that sound like it's a solution, and it's not the right solution. Yeah.
And that extends to just mandatory drug testing of pregnant people, because in states all across the country, particularly in the South, but story after story abounds of pregnant women who did not seek prenatal care, who did not even go to hospitals to deliver or to birthing centers because they were afraid of mandatory testing. So women were giving birth in their cars, they're giving birth in their bathrooms, and there is a correlation between these restrictions and the exceedingly high rate of maternal and infant mortality. The more restrictive state laws are, the higher the incidence. So, I know we're exceeding our time. We thank you very much. I am going to say, if anybody, NCJW is the only group that really does the umbrella advocacy. We are down at the legislature, we are talking to legislators, we are providing talking points, so if you want to join us, Keisha is in the back there and she can sign you up.
Can I ask Julie a question?
Yes, go ahead, Kim.
Julie? My name is Kim and I just retired after 42 years in education, and I realize you're a prosecuting attorney, but if I ever get in trouble, would you please represent me?
She's thinking about getting in trouble.
For you, Kim, anything, and I don't prosecute anymore,
Thank you.
so.
I just want to extend my thanks and make a couple final remarks. Some thank yous, because I forgot to do them up front. Thank you to Victor and Magdalena for having us here today. Victor's probably with help. Keisha in the back is with NCJW, and she has been invaluable in this whole process. Katie Ryder, who is my partner, not yet in crime, but we might be getting there, who is with Jews for a Secular Democracy. I am blessed to know probably 90% of the people in this room personally, and I will say that this is such a remarkable group. Please stay for lunch, give us a couple minutes to bring out food, and have more conversations, because you are all brilliant and committed and passionate and engaged, and there are so many connections right here. I mean, you've heard of a few different groups as we've been talking. NCJW, I can't say enough good things. League for Women Voters, Greater Tucson. Victor is the league's outgoing president, and so thank you all for being here today. We do have a notary if folks need petitions notarized. Francesca.
Just the number of that House bill?
1186.
1186. A couple other things. Some of the themes that came through today, one of which is the intersection of all of this. When I sat down with my JCRC committee just about a year ago, and we were getting the gang back together, and we were talking about passions and priorities and where we were going to expend our efforts and our energy, we talked about LGBTQ rights, we talked about reproductive justice, we talked about immigration, we talked about anti-Semitism and other forms of hate-based or identity-based violence, and the thing that rose to the top was democracy, resilience, and civic engagement, right? Or maybe that's the bottom, maybe that's the bedrock. And that is why I got involved with NCJW. I wanted people
Oh my God.
down here to have a conduit to the work being done in our state capitol. This is the most engaged, full of information, remarkable group of people. I want to thank you for, acknowledging that not just women get pregnant. I mean, the work here is about healthy families. It is about healthy people. It is about making a more sustainable environment for children to grow up in. So you all are working in that space in different ways, and I'm just so thrilled that you're all here today. So big thank you again. Please take lunch as an opportunity to get to meet your neighbors and see what amazing things people are doing.
Just, I know that it's being videotaped, is.
Oh, that's right. Thank you for reminding me that my phone is there.
Yeah. No, I'm saying, we're here where my brain's been beyond exploding, I don't know. Is it possible to get this video out?
Yes,
as
so
far
this
and
will
wide
be
as
on
possible?
the Tucson Jewish Museum's YouTube page. It will be
Yeah,
on
but-
NCJW's YouTube page. I will send a follow-up email to folks who are here today. I have all your emails. Sarah, you mistyped yours, so you're lucky I know you. But I'll let you know where to find it, and you will make sure that you have contact information for everyone who
And
spoke today.
this panel needs to go to the rural areas. I lived in Sierra Vista, and there's all those rural towns beyond Sierra Vista.
Well, we
They
have
need
called
to
this
hear.
the Jody and Julie Show, and thrilled to have Dr. Gabby here with us today, and I'm happy to take it on the road. We'll take it on the road. So thank you all again.
I'll donate to that.
Women don't get pregnant without